Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. I'm perhaps fortunate that in my line of work, I rarely encounter entitled parents, but reading these stories has reminded me of an incident that took place many years ago. I was working for a small dance and theater production company in the 1970s. One day, the boss decided we needed to clean our dance floor, which was essentially half a dozen rolls of very heavy-duty black linoleum. We did a lot of work with ballet companies, and consequently, the flooring got covered in dancers' rosin, a rather sticky powder-like substance that ballet dancers use on their shoes for grip, which needed cleaning periodically. The quickest way we found to do this was to haul the whole setup down to the local foreshore along the Thames, roll it out into the water, and then give it a good scrubbing with a stiff bristled broom. It worked well, and would only take 20 minutes. On this day, it was extremely cold, so I decided to get into my wetsuit, as I'd have to walk one end of the roll out into the river, and I didn't fancy freezing my butt off standing around in the Thames. As I walked out the third roll, I felt a rather odd sensation in my right foot. Something was clearly off, so I walked back up onto the foreshore. It felt like the ball of my foot was flapping about as if it had somehow been disconnected from the rest of my foot. Stepping out of the water, I saw that my foot was bleeding profusely. I had apparently trodden on a large piece of broken glass that had sliced right through my plimsolls and straight into my foot. Alarmed, my boss quickly wrangled the floor section we'd been cleaning into the van, and we hurried off to the nearest accident and emergency department. 10 minutes later, I was sitting on a chair in the very busy waiting room, still in my wetsuit, with a sweatshirt tightly wrapped around my foot while the boss checked me in. I was still losing blood rapidly. Obviously, I had sliced into some major blood vessels, and there was a pool of blood accumulating on the floor despite the temporary bandage. As you might imagine, I was also starting to feel rather faint and very out of sorts. It was at this juncture that the Karen manifested in all her glory. Sitting almost opposite was, as I have subsequently discovered, a stereotypical Karen sporting a coiffure of indeterminate provenance and an expression like she'd consumed enough lemons to populate the glasses of every single gin and tonic drinker in the country. Sitting with her was a glum-looking 9-year-old. "Excuse me, would you mind not bleeding all over the floor in front of my son? It's making him feel sick." Seriously? Despite my weakened state, I felt affronted. "What would you like me to do? Go and find needle and thread and sew it up myself?" Remarkably, the lemon-sucking expression intensified. "Why don't you sit somewhere else?" It was at this point that decorum departed. I gave her both barrels at close range and at high volume. "Why don't you just leave and sit somewhere else if it bothers you so much? You can clearly see that walking around with a severely gashed foot is going to be something of a problem for me. You, on the other hand, seem to be perfectly capable of getting up off your seat with minimal effort. If you're that bothered, go somewhere else." If looks could kill, I would have died on the spot. But I continued to stare her down. At this point, my boss came back from checking me in. He parked his 6 feet 2 inch frame in front of her, and in a low but menacing voice started to speak to her. In Russian, Karen went white, and grabbing her son's hand, scurried off to the other side of the waiting room. Shortly thereafter, I was called into a consulting room, and 13 stitches and a pint of blood later, I was sent home to recuperate. The boss took me home, and on the way back I asked him what he'd said to Karen. My mother's recipe for borscht, addendum. Karen's son was in for the removal of a tiny wood splinter in his pinky. This isn't as good as many I've read here, but when you're really upset, a win feels really good. I work in an industry I loathe. I prefer helping people one-on-one to improve their lives however I can, but life brought me to a corporate nightmare full of negativity, an overly ambitious hipster chief executive officer, and enough money for promotional items, but not enough to hire enough people for each department. As a result, everyone suffers with useless items no one cares about. The turnover rate is incredibly high. I work in an essential, often overlooked section of the company. We handle massive volumes of clients who choose our company or leave. We handle legal contracts, keep new clients happy before sending them to their new team, and complete a million other tiny tasks that need to be done precisely, or it will ruin other departments and cost us a lot of money. There is not one person in this company who knows every aspect of our specific role and how to keep everything afloat. My team lead decided it was time to leave and pursue her dream career. After nearly 6 years of perfecting this role, 4 of those years with me, being the meticulous, procedure-perfecting, anxious about making mistakes type of person, we were the backbone of the sector, dream team. When she left, she told all the bosses who praised her highly that I should get the job. She knew full well I hated this place, but I was waiting for something perfect to come along. She also knew I was the only one who could hit the ground running. I didn't exactly want the job, but we would all end up suffering, and I would end up training without the extra pay, so I reluctantly took it. The sheer amount of stress from cross-training for 2 weeks for this position, while already doing my full duties, an extremely stressful job in itself, and picking up the slack for both of us while she tied up loose ends, made me so stressed out that I was having chest pains, breaking down and wanting to quit. This being a terrible company with horrible leadership, I didn't even get my contract until several weeks after I accepted the job and discussed the terms. They still haven't filled my previous position, so I am still suffering a few months after I started training. No increased payment for the training and extra work I had to endure, and they chose the start date after the training was done. I have been losing hair, breaking out, having nightmares, bursting into tears, and had to find a therapist because I have been pushing myself to be the best I can while being set up for failure. I have zero support and care about a job well done, but I am just failing no matter how many extra hours I put in on evenings and weekends. My mental health is going down the drain. On to the actual malicious compliance. I started work at 7:30 a.m. for 4 years. This helped a lot with my work-life balance, because I am a single mom, and I can be home a bit earlier to take care of them. We have the option to work an extra 25 minutes each day to get a half day off every second Friday. Some people don't care about it, but I found this incredibly useful, especially for doctor appointments, and to use only a half-day vacation for a full day off. This meant I worked from 7:30 a.m. to 4:25 p.m. We have an hour unpaid lunch we have to take. These 2 things were the reason I stuck around this long. They kept me sane and allowed me to be there for my kids as much as I could and still be fully mentally present for them. I was told that if I became a team lead, I would have to start at 8:30 and end at 5 o'clock. I asked if that could be modified at all, but the answer was no. Frustrated. I thought I was already taking on far more stress, and now I have less time with my children too, and the kids see my suffering as much as I try to hide it. I was then told that I would no longer get every second Friday as a half-day either, so no more working the extra 25 minutes a day. The reasoning was, we need you here during normal business hours. It made sense, but it was frustrating. For a company that needs me to keep this business going, no one was budging on this. As someone who already hates this place, and feels no one cares about my mental health and how I have even been injured for this company, I shut down. So I logged into the system to book days off every second Friday and asked my old team lead to approve them right before she left. She said, gladly. Now I have every second Friday off. I don't work the extra 25 minutes a day. I get paid way more, and I am using my new title to find a better job. Less work for more money while I hand in resumes. I am trying to learn to be okay with failure in the meantime. Woosah. Whenever we have a meeting where the boss asks if they should be aware of any time off, I just smile and remind them that I have the usual every second Friday as a half day. They just nod. The end. Many moons ago, I spent my youth in the army. I worked in communications and spent some excellent years doing foolish things with some of the best guys and girls you could ever meet. One of those years of my misspent youth, I was deployed to a hot and sandy location. This length of deployment was unusual for me, as most deployments in the British Army are 6 months. The extra time was due to us being one of the first units deployed, and after supporting the initial deployment, they requested volunteers to remain and support and train some of the relieving units and newly deployed logistics headquarters. At this stage in my career, I had been lucky enough to jump from deployment to deployment, and I was loving the extra money that gave me, so I happily volunteered to stay. I was tasked with supporting one of the logistics headquarters. I had run that detachment earlier in the deployment and was happy to return, as it was far away from the main headquarters and all the bored adults and seniors that the headquarters brings. Think sweeping the desert, that kind of thing. Our little detachment was an oasis in a sea of nonsense. It was just 6 guys and girls with me as the detachment commander. I was a corporal at the time. The isolated nature of our detachment meant that anyone sent there had to be able to operate independently, be very adaptable, and open to improvising to support where required. Our main unit also liked to send us there troublemakers, but due to the nature of the detachment, they could only send us people who could do their role also. So I ended up with all the best and most interesting characters of my unit, and it was amazing. For any American readers, it would have been a paradise for junior enlisted personnel. Within weeks, we had a patio and rock garden set up. We had a barbecue pit, shower area, and gym. We had sorted a deal with the local civilian contractors for us to receive beer in exchange for our help in vehicle and generator servicing. The best part was, due to us being a communications detachment, it was restricted entry to our area, so we were free from any surprise visits. Now that I've set out the backstory, I'll get onto the malicious compliance. The headquarters we were supporting was regularly rotating its senior non-commissioned officers and officers from the deployment. They'd do the minimum time to qualify for a medal, and then they'd get replaced with someone new. It was a lousy practice that eventually got shut down, but not until much later deployments. We were fairly used to this by now, and the only overhead we had was creating new accounts for the seniors, the guys who actually did the work. My peer group in the headquarters stayed mostly the same. This latest rotation saw the old regimental quartermaster sergeant being replaced by a newly promoted regimental quartermaster sergeant. This new guy was unpleasant, full of his own self-importance. He hated that we had a little island of nonsense-free tranquility within his eyesight. I'd see him pacing outside our fence line when he first arrived, unable to comprehend that he wasn't allowed to just walk in. By this point, I had been in this location for about 6 months, and I was thoroughly past the point of caring. The regimental quartermaster sergeant hated that he had to deal with me, a lowly corporal, as officer in charge of the detachment, and that myself and my crew of reprobates were out of his chain of command. One day he absolutely lost his cool because we were beaching half a goat and had invited a few of his guys to join us after work for some beers and delicious goat wraps. By this stage, we'd used Hessian to fence off our barbecue and bar area so that we could obscure it from prying eyes. He went off to get some of his unit's regimental police. These are not real military police, just jobsworths with no real job in a unit, to come and shut us down. I told them to jog on. They weren't getting into my detachment, and I didn't care who sent them. Apparently, the next day he was furious. The guys who worked with him warned us he was determined to bring my detachment to heel. His solution was removing our welfare package, which we were issued through his department as a favor from his guys for some services that we were providing. It consisted of a small fridge, TV, and British Forces Broadcasting Service TV decoder. The conversation went roughly as follows. Regimental Quartermaster Sergeant, Corporal Tosspot, it appears that there has been a paperwork error, and you have been given one of my welfare packages by mistake. Me. Okay, sir. I'd be happy to fill that in. Shall I drop by your office? Regimental Quartermaster Sergeant. You can drop by my office and bring the package, but you won't be filling in any paperwork, Corporal. You may have wrangled the last regimental quartermaster, but as far as I'm concerned, you lot can do one if you think you're getting that welfare package back off me. And if there's anything else that I find that isn't 100% correct paperwork-wise, then I'll be shutting that right down. You may not be mine, and I may not be able to enter your little compound, but I'm going to have you, son. Every resupply demand, every transport request better be completed correctly. I'm going to make your lives hell with paperwork and admin. Cue malicious compliance. Me. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. I'm sorry you feel the service that we provide isn't good enough. The old regimental quartermaster was very happy with the services that he was getting from us, and sent over the spare welfare package as a thank you. Are you sure that it's paperwork that's the issue here? Are you not happy with phones and the internet? Regimental Quartermaster Sergeant. Corporal, I have no complaints regarding the communications. You just need to complete the correct paperwork, and have it authorized by me. At this point, it is clear that he is never going to authorize the return of the welfare package, and is very smug about it. Me. Okay, sir, you're, of course, correct. Paperwork is essential. Regimental Quartermaster Sergeant. Are you giving me attitude, Corporal? Me. Not at all, sir, just agreeing with you. To be clear, you are happy with everything else we provide to the headquarters. You just want me to complete the correct paperwork? Regimental Quartermaster Sergeant. That's correct, Corporal. Me. No problem, sir. Happy to oblige. I delivered the welfare package back to his stores. His guys were very apologetic. I told them not to worry. You see, the welfare package was a thank you for all the extra phone lines and terminals that we'd provided for the previous regimental quartermaster. These expanded his and his unit's working capacity. Most importantly, I had run a phone line to the sleeping areas, so that he and his lads could call home without using their limited welfare phone cards. I'd also laid some precious unfiltered internet lines too. Internet to deployed units is very rare, and unfiltered internet is almost unheard of for British units. What I was providing was immense value to lonely soldiers, and it was also without paperwork. When I got back to my detachment, I flicked a couple of switches, turning off all the paperwork-less connections. I waited for the inevitable. It didn't take long. The first visitor was one of the privates letting us know that he'd been cut off mid-call back home. I apologized and explained what was going on with the regimental quartermaster sergeant. He understood, not happy about it, but understood. He went off muttering about fools who can't leave well enough alone. The next was one of the regimental quartermaster sergeant's corporals, who I have a lot of time for. She came round and asked what was going on with the communications. She was in the office when I had the conversation with the regimental quartermaster sergeant earlier. We had a bit of chat about what a belter he is, and then she asked what was going on. I explained that as per the regimental quartermaster sergeant's request, we are following his example and doing things by the book, and I've turned off all services without the correct paperwork. She looked at me knowingly. So what does that mean? She asked. I explained that the only services that I had been ordered to provide were for the headquarters. The rest would have to request them through me and be approved by division headquarters as per orders. I handed her a copy of the request forms to be completed in triplicate, as I didn't have a photocopier, and they couldn't send it to me by email since I'd just turned their kit off. She had a bit of a chuckle and went off back to her boss, paperwork in hand. You see, the only orders I had were for the 6 lines and terminal in the headquarters. The 30-odd lines I'd laid extra were essentially me being a good bloke and supporting the mission and departments as they grew around the headquarters. It was initiative and adaptability on my part. These were all now off, and I had a steady stream of visitors throughout the day wanting to know what was going on. I directed them all to the regimental quartermaster sergeant, who had the request forms. My last visitor was the operations captain. He was a top bloke, a late entry officer, had gone through the ranks from private to regimental sergeant major, and was now commissioned as an officer, who had spent more than a few nights in our compound with a beer and talking nonsense with us. He was one of the very first recipients of a private line and internet. He asked me what was going on. He'd been around the houses, so he knew there were shenanigans afoot. I told him the situation. His face dropped. "Leave it with me," is all that he said, and off he went. 30 minutes later, the regimental quartermaster sergeant was back at the entrance to my compound with the welfare package. The operations captain was with him, looming over him as only a former regimental sergeant major can. Me. "Hello, sir, how can I help?" Regimental quartermaster sergeant, very sheepishly. "Hello, corporal. There seems to have been an error, and we've found your paperwork for the welfare package. So I'm returning it with my apologies." Me. "No need to apologize, sir. Easy mistake to make." Regimental quartermaster sergeant. "So are we good?" Me. "And the other paperwork moving forward?" Regimental quartermaster sergeant. "There's no need for all that." Looking over his shoulder at the operations captain. "We are, after all, on the same team." Me. "We are indeed, sir." I look over my shoulder and give one of my guys a nod. "I think you'll find everything is now back to as it was." Regimental quartermaster sergeant. "Excellent. Thank you very much, corporal." And off he went. The operations captain stared daggers at him as he left. He just gave me a nod and confirmed that drinks were still on for the next day, and toddled off back to his pit. I was never bothered by the regimental quartermaster sergeant again. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. This is my first post after listening to lots of videos with Reddit content. I just love the stories, and I thought I would share some of my own. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, I was traveling regularly for work. This time, I was heading to Edinburgh. The flight was uneventful, and we landed safely. However, after touching down, we were asked to remain seated, as there were some issues at the gate, and they could not dock yet. About 10 minutes passed. I was sitting at the back of the plane, as I generally find those seats are taken last, often leaving me with an empty space next to me. This time, however, the plane was fully booked, so no luck. A woman in her 30s or 40s got up regardless and walked past me to the end of the plane, entering one of the toilets. I guess her need was urgent, or she did not care about the instructions to remain seated. I had a window seat and was looking at the gates about a mile from where we were parked. I noticed the crew mounting stairs to the back door of the plane, and I was preparing for a bus trip to the gate, or worse, a long walk. I thought they were going to let us disembark here instead of at the gates, but I was in for a surprise. Instead of a crew member climbing the stairs, I saw 5 police officers. The flight attendant opened the back door, and 4 officers came in while one stayed just outside the door. 2 officers stayed in the back, and the other 2 walked to about 5 rows in front of me and arrested one of the passengers. I had no idea why, but he complied. His girlfriend or wife was not arrested, but was also getting up. This story is not about them though. This was my first time ever witnessing something like this happening in at least 50 flights a year. The story is about the woman who had entered the toilet just before the police showed up. She probably had no idea what was happening and tried to leave the toilet, only to be ordered back in by one of the officers. She started shouting that she wanted to get out, but the officer was firm and told her to stay inside. He did not give a reason, but from his tone it was clear he was not taking any of her nonsense. While the man and woman were gathering their stuff, the woman in the toilet started screaming, demanding to be let out. Again, the officer told her to quiet down and assured her that what was happening was in no way related to her. He told her this would only take a few minutes, and she could leave the toilet after they were gone. She was having none of it, and began screaming even louder, making demands, trying to open the door, which the officer closed again. She cursed and called him names, insisting that he let her out, and return her to her family. This went on for several minutes. When the man who was arrested was led to the back of the plane, the officer at the toilet plainly told the woman that if she continued, she would be arrested and taken off the plane as well. That finally quieted her down. I felt for the officer and admired his patience. I would not have tolerated her nonsense for as long as he did. 2 minutes later, the police left with the arrested man and his girlfriend, and the woman was finally allowed to leave the toilet, Everybody was looking in her direction as she quietly returned to her seat. We arrived 30 minutes late, but I did not mind. The entertainment on this flight was quite something. Edit. I read a lot of comments about the woman in the toilet possibly having a panic attack or something similar. I am not ruling that out, though to me, it sounded more demanding and entitled than panicked. For example, she kept saying, "I order you to let me out right now." She was constantly making demands. Still, that does not rule out the possibility that it could have been a panic attack. Also, somebody commented about the officer not telling the woman what was happening. That was something I wondered about as well. He did tell her he was law enforcement, and that there was nothing to worry about, and they were not there for her, but no further explanation of what was happening. It could be that they are not supposed to disclose details, but he could have told her they were making an arrest, as everybody else was witnessing that. Maybe somebody knows if this is normal procedure. This happened at my last job but was reminded of it this morning. The backstory. I worked in a middle management position that coordinated an after-hours care program for adults. I had a micromanaging dinosaur for a boss. Let's call her Hetty. Hetty oversaw the day operation as well, and I shared an office with the direct manager of that program. Given they operated at different times, we often shared clients, but as I did my administrative work during business hours, I often briefly visited the clients in their day activities to ask them about their preferred activities for my program. I had no real opportunity to consult them at any other time, particularly as Hetty decreased my allotted administrative time further and further. She just loved tightening the noose and took particular delight in nobody ever being able to get comfortable in their role, firmly believing that if she kept us all on our toes, she would get more work out of us. It was stressful and incredibly draining. Another strict rule of Hetty's was that despite female staff being allowed to provide personal care, showers, changing, etc., to male clients, she did not allow male staff to provide intimate care to female clients. This will be important to the story. And yes, I'm fully aware this was gender discrimination, and I argued the point multiple times but was overruled. The only thing Hetty loved more than setting arbitrary rules was catching us out breaking them. It was near impossible to work the position without breaking any of her rules, one of which was that I was not allowed to involve myself in the day service. Involvement basically constituted me being anywhere out of my office and near clients during the day. She would sneak quietly around the building, listening around corners, and then leap out suddenly to catch the offender. One day, one of the clients would be transitioning from the day activities straight into my program for the evening. The entire premise of the program was client choice, and as such, I needed to know what my client would like to cook for dinner, so I could purchase groceries before I clocked off. I was discussing it with the client when Hetty zoomed in around the door and asked to see me in her office. She dressed me down for interfering in the other program and told me in no uncertain terms that I was to stay completely away from it and in my own lane, or I'd be facing disciplinary action. Fine. I knew it would come back to bite her. Mere days later, the day program was winding up for the day, with only a few late-staying clients remaining along with one male worker. One of the female clients had a need for a change of clothing. The male worker came and knocked on the door of my office to let me know the client needed changing. Cue the malicious compliance. Worker Jane needs a change of clothes. Me. Loudly, knowing Hetty was next door in her office with the door wide open. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'd love to help, but unfortunately, you're currently working with the day program, and I've been expressly instructed I'm not allowed to interfere. Maybe Hetty can help. I'm sure she's in her office." Worker, knowing all too well the nonsense we put up with from Hetty, gives me a sly grin and moves on to Hetty's office to interrupt a phone call she was having because, hey, the client comes first. I dutifully stay at my desk, listening to her ask the worker to seek my assistance, knowing full well that she heard every word of the previous conversation. The worker repeats my refusal to her, and she goes off after much grumbling to assist the client. Of course, Hetty scolded me for not being a team player later on. I simply pointed out her insistence earlier in the week that I not involve myself in any way with the other service. She scoffed and told me I was being deliberately difficult, and of course, if there was a need, I was duty-bound to meet it. I reiterated that it was impossible for me to know which tasks would be deemed dutiful, and therefore innocently followed her instructions to the letter. She had nothing to come back with on this occasion. It did, unfortunately, escalate her bullying with me, but it was on that trajectory regardless. I ultimately burned out a couple of years later and had to leave, but that one act of malicious compliance remains a bright spot in what was otherwise almost a decade of appalling treatment. I've been in a new role for over 2 years where I have incredibly supportive management and colleagues, but I still see Hetty around, and every time, I flip her a gentle but unmistakable gesture of defiance. 22F. Met my partner, 23GF, on Facebook dating when I was 20, and they were 21. I had never been in a relationship, and had been on dating apps for years at this point. We clicked shockingly quickly, and were messaging each other constantly. We had so many similarities neither of us thought we'd see in another person. We saw each other's character extremely quickly. It was like looking in a mirror. So we became a couple after 2 dates, and there was no question about it. I noticed some odd behavior from their parents very quickly, particularly regarding how restrictive they were about our initial meeting. I wasn't allowed to pick up my partner. The dad had to come with us, and he even took a picture of us at the restaurant to prove to the mom he stayed with us the entire time, though he just drove around the plaza to give us some privacy. I dismissed it as them wanting to make sure I wasn't a catfish or something, so I didn't think it would continue past our first date. I met the mom on the second date. I went to church with them since my partner was forced to go, even though we're both atheists, and that's where I saw all the red flags. I joined them on an outing and wasn't even allowed to drive myself there. We barely got the chance to be out of earshot of the family. The mom only told me, "Hello, and it was nice to meet you," the entire time, and when my partner tried every opportunity to include her, she has a history of being upset when not included. She would just complain at them like it was a personal attack. I was infuriated, having personal experience with those types of comments from my own mother, who I temporarily cut off at 18. So I mentioned what I saw in our phone call that night, to make sure my partner knew they tried their best, and it wasn't their fault she reacted that way. We officially became a couple a few hours later. We made a relationship update the next morning, and naturally, the mom was making comments to my partner about us moving too fast. My partner tried everything to tell her about me, but she would either get upset or find something to disapprove of, despite it being in line with her morals. We could only see each other on the dad's schedule, so of course it conflicted a lot with mine. I got increasingly frustrated that I couldn't see my partner on our time like we weren't both adults. The fact that I had been so respectful of their silly rules and never complained, only to get no respect in return, made me start playing it my way. I worked only a few minutes away from their house, and got off around midnight, so I got the idea of asking my partner to sneak out so we could go to some late-night restaurants. My partner hadn't done that before, nor had I, but we successfully did this 5 nights in a row. We had our first kiss the first night in the middle of their street. It honestly felt like a movie. On the 3rd night, my partner complained that the dad wouldn't buy more allergy medication and didn't want to use up the mom's. So at work the next day, I decided to deliver the medication and some goodies from Walgreens. I asked my partner first, of course, but they assumed that I was getting it delivered to my place for our meetup that night. I thought if the parents were going to get upset, it would be because I had their address. The mom exploded over this, and then gave my partner the silent treatment. The dad came in to explain to my partner what was wrong, saying it was weird to get someone medication outside of marriage, it was too expensive, and my partner was leeching off of me. I was obviously baffled and infuriated. My partner was being punished over something I did. It was $25 over-the-counter meds, and an absolute gift. My partner never asked for it. It was my idea. And who were they to criticize the way I spend my money? On night 5, the mom put a parental lock on my partner's internet, probably to hinder contact with me, as if phone data doesn't exist. My partner had enough and took me up on my offer of staying with me. So they took a bag and their cat and ran away that night. At 21, my partner left a note making it clear this was their decision, not mine. The dad called the next afternoon, obviously upset, and begging my partner to come home. He then showed up at my work, but he obviously was only there to beg for his kid back, not have a proper conversation about why my partner left. So I wasn't interested. Our intention was to shock them into perspective that they needed to respect my partner as an adult, and weren't entitled to a relationship with their kid if they treated them poorly. That is exactly what I did with my mother, and our relationship has never been stronger. Our terms were that we could all discuss what happened and why together, but my partner would not do it without me, because I would make sure things were properly communicated without risk of them intimidating and manipulating my partner. They refused, citing it as a family issue, as if I wasn't involved, and they weren't actively villainizing me. So their other option was going to therapy. The dad assumed I wouldn't listen in on their phone calls. He actually agreed to speak to my dad, I live with him, and then tried to use my father's conversation to manipulate my partner by twisting his words, to make it sound like my father agreed with him that he was right to make my partner come back. He also tried to use the fact my partner couldn't drive and didn't have a job or life skills against them. But who was supposed to teach them? I easily saw through his tactics, but my partner was not able to defend themselves against it. If the dad just talked to me, I could answer his concerns. Not only did I rent my first apartment at 17, but I had done the research and been prepared to help a friend become independent with even more hurdles than my partner. I was literally the best person to handle this entire situation, as if all my life experiences prepared me for this relationship. He kept saying things like blah 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 wasn't logical, trying to make my partner feel unreasonable. They literally thought my dad and I were involved in human trafficking, and outed my partner to their grandparents, so they disowned my partner. The mom demanded $200 for my partner's phone that wasn't my or my father's money, and would only hand over their social security card and birth certificate needed to get a job if my partner gave her their cat, which was in my partner's name, and purchased with their own money, until she got the money she wanted because you clearly love the cat more than me. The dad eventually convinced her to hand over the documents. My partner agreed to go to Taco Bell alone with him to get the documents and talk a bit. That's when he presented an ultimatum he wrote with the mom. It said my partner had to move back home or with the grandparents before the outing, in I think 10 days, with the benefits of them helping my partner learn to drive and get a job, freedom to see me whenever and getting therapy. And if not, they would cut off from the family, phone and health insurance. My partner just said whatever to make the conversation end. I read that and said, bet, then ordered a new phone line. I was literally yelling, call their bluff, what, we're just supposed to trust them to keep their word even if my partner agreed to it? The mom then blasted this family matter on Facebook, saying my father and I had my partner in a stranglehold, continuing this narrative that my partner wasn't capable of making their own thoughts and decisions. My partner fought with her in the comments, and she even said, if you think it's forever, you're fooling yourself and you're burning all your bridges as you go. As if this woman who said 2 things to me knew the longevity of our relationship. They finally arranged for the mom and my partner to see a counselor. It didn't go well the second session, so my partner refused to go back. But in these sessions, the mom said she knew I was a bad person during the medication debacle because my partner shrugged at one of her questions, which was giving her an attitude, which was clearly picked up from an outside source. Obviously, they just kept going. They said they listed the house for sale so they could move out of state because this situation was too much. They were literally forcing my partner to choose between them and me. I never wanted that. I suspected it was a lie, but my stepmother confirmed the house was never listed for sale, which is even more ironic because my partner told her they wanted a new therapist because the second therapy session made them suicidal, and she completely ignored that, then said she needed to talk later, so she wasn't too distressed before the realtor comes. The dad kept insisting my partner reach back out to her and reassure her that my partner loves her and this isn't her fault. But it is. So my partner finally blocked them both. Then the dad took their brother's phone and pretended to be him. So my partner also had to block their brother. All because the parents couldn't understand they weren't entitled to a relationship with their child. There were more shenanigans from the dad through email and physical mail. But he finally agreed to have a discussion with both of us a year in. He finally gave up after I wrote him a 6-page email laying out everything he needed to take responsibility for, and everything he would need to do to mend the relationship. And my partner had their own version, chastising him. It felt like an argumentative essay about why he's a bad person, including sources. The silence is bliss. Oh, and we're 2 years in now and engaged. The ring was in an allergy meds bottle. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences and opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.